The audio you're about to hear was recorded in Anchor. Learn more at anchor.fm.
This is Shayla Adams-Stafford, and you're listening to PBL in Practice. Thank you for tuning in to another week of Project-Based Learning in Practice, a weekly broadcast where we talk with top leaders in project-based learning to discover best practices, share successes and failures, and learn from one another. My name is Shayla Adams-Stafford, and I've been an educator for the past 10 years, focusing specifically on project-based learning. I had the amazing opportunity to speak at the White House in 2015 and share how PBL looks in my classroom before a room of national leaders. I'm a member of the National Faculty of Buck Institute, founder of Remix Education, a nonprofit that serves first-generation college-bound students. Enough about me, let's get into our guest. Our guest for today is Melissa Teets, a 20-year teaching veteran and nationally board certified teacher. She spent 6 years teaching in Moore County, North Carolina before moving to Raleigh and teaching at Northern Durham High School. She taught at Person High School, Hillside New Tech High School, where we met several years ago, Three Springs Wilderness Camp, and other venues. She is currently teaching AP Literature at Bartlett Yancey High School in Caswell County and providing professional development in PBL to her staff. Let's dive into the interview. Hey, Melissa, how?
I'm fine, Shayla. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being a guest on PBL in Practice. Melissa and I taught at Hillside New Tech many moons ago, and she she was my partner in crime on a lot of things, and so I definitely am honored to have her as one of our first guests on PBL in Practice. And so we just heard a little bit about your background, but what else should listeners know about you, Melissa, and just something that we wouldn't know if just by listening to your bio?
Well, something I don't know if you ever knew was that I coached boys basketball. When I joined Bartlett Yancey, where I'm at now, I was the head coach. I did that for 3 years. So I spent about 15 or 16 years coaching boys basketball here in North Carolina at the high school, JV and varsity level.
Okay. The question in North Carolina when it comes to basketball is, which team are you on? You know, are you Duke or UNC?
And I'm a Duke team member.
Okay. All right.
And you're right. It is a North Carolina thing. When I lived in West Virginia, you could really like both. And then you come down here and it's not an option at all, is it?
There is a very clear delineation. You're either Duke or UNC. So,
yes.
Well, at least it's in Durham. But yeah. So, tell us a little bit about what brought you to project-based learning.
I was actually teaching at Person High School for a while, and then started teaching at a wilderness school out in Chatham County, North Carolina.
Wow.
And it was just, it was very different. Just, I was at a point where I didn't know if I wanted to be outside of the classroom, I guess literally, or what it was exactly that I wanted to do. And I really enjoyed my time out there. People tell you all the time, no matter where you teach, that kids are kids. And that was really the case. I really serious drug issues, serious issues with the law, who really just needed some attention and some refocusing. And it was a really great place to work. And it shut down. The state shut down all their facilities. And Dan Guilford, who's the principal of Northern Durham High School now, told me about an opening at New Tech. And it was really an awakening when I walked in and saw what you guys were doing and looked at a grade book and things like that. So I kind of got thrown into project-based learning.
Yeah. And even though you were thrown in, you did an amazing job. You did amazing work with the kids at Hillside New Tech. And what do you feel now looking back and some of the work that you're doing now and actually training teachers in PBL? What do you think is your PBL superpower?
I think it's getting along with my students and having a student-centered environment. That part of my teaching wasn't really hard to change. There were a lot of things that were very different. And I did notice that all of you guys were very young, very new to teaching, and really didn't understand how much work you were putting into your work. You were just there at 6 or 7 o'clock, and that's how it was. So, but I think I've always had a student-centered classroom. I've always cared more about, my kids than test results or other things. And so that part I think was quite natural. And I think you really need to understand what the kids need and how they're going to get it, in order to do anything in project-based learning, is to really understand what the kids can do and how they can get that done.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I want to dive deeper into really what this student-centered classroom and the management style looks like, and maybe we'll get to that in a few. But can you tell us a little bit about a time or a story or a student that really was like your breakthrough PBL moment?
I think the group of students that I had my first semester there, I kind of got there in the middle of a semester, and I assigned them to design a website, which meanwhile I was learning to do at the same time. And he's probably a breakthrough kid for everyone who taught him, but Khalil Gonzalez just knew what, and if he didn't know how to do it, he found out so fast. And just took the time to listen. He was obviously the leader in every group he was around, but you really had to pay attention because he listens to everyone's ideas and made them all feel important. And, now that he's almost the CEO of McDonald's or whatever, I mean, that's, not really surprising to us. But seeing how he worked within a group dynamic like that really showed me what you guys have been able to accomplish with these kids. I had them as juniors. So those 3 years, 2.5 years you guys had with them, just so much about what they learned about working in a group that, a lot of adults don't understand.
Yeah. And I agreed. Really just creating like a pipeline for students so that by the time they are juniors, they are really running their own classroom if they're not at the onset, and managing it themselves and learning those really critical collaboration skills. You mentioned the concept of having a student-centered classroom management style. Can you talk more about some specific moves you make to really create a student-centered time or student-centered environment for your kids?
Well, honestly, and I think one of the reasons I brought up coaching is I think coaching has a lot to do with it. I teach as in, I'm always about we in our classroom. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And to really encourage everyone to get involved with what we're doing, kind of a no man left behind kind of thing, and to help them to push one another. I'm outside of it in a lot of ways. I design the work that they do, and people ask what a PBL centered classroom is like, and we know what it looks like. It looks like us behind our desk half the time, like we're not doing anything. And the students are just running away with whatever it is that they're doing. And so I try to design the lessons for them and then just really let them take those ideas and those concepts where they're going to go. And sometimes it's giving them some say in what we're going to study, but not always. But it's just allowing them to have that time to develop their own leadership skills, to disagree with one another, with you, to provide them with a safe space for that, and to learn how to communicate with one another in a way that they just don't get to in traditional classrooms, no matter how hard teachers try or believe that they're letting them do that. They just don't get that collaboration any other way.
Yeah, no. And I think one of the key points you brought up was the design of your lesson. And I think that a lot of folks that are just getting into project-based learning, really underestimate the amount of time in designing a really meaningful project, how much it takes. And you've done some projects that have been really hard hitting. You have done a project on 9/11, and we're actually teaching, I think this year, or maybe it was last year, the first group of students that were born after 9/11.
Yeah.
And so how do you design a project that's student-centered? And you're really dealing with things that these students have really no, reference to, but we know that this is something major that happened in our country. And it's a very deep and very tragic topic. Like, how do you infuse all of that into a project, that really touches students and moves them with the content as well?
Well, so the area where I teach now is it's a very impoverished, very rural area, and a lot of the students have someone in the military, or it's their goal to go to the military. So sometimes I've been able to introduce the project that way. Conspiracies have become such a big deal, and I was surprised that they kind of had a hook into my students, honestly. Even 9/11 conspiracy theories, it did surprise me. But so this year, the project that I did with my students was kind of a conspiracy-based unit. And of course, so we needed some background in 9/11, and it is complete history to them. How many planes were there? How many, who hit what? Because of the way the U.S. history courses have been taught, they're a year long now. I think last year was the first year they were able to actually get to 9/11.
Get to it, yeah.
But, so I kind of picked up the slack on that before. But so with some background on that, this year we did 9/11, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, and Hurricane Katrina. And so we watched some documentaries on those. The students, we did editorial articles, things like that. And I'm really loving teaching with documentaries more. My students last year, one of their projects was to do a documentary, but giving them those things and allowing them to really just to sit and process, you compare the deaths of 9/11 to the deaths of Hurricane Katrina and realize they were pretty close. And to just, listen to when the levees broke, the people that Spike Lee interviewed, he was masterful with he picked regular folks, just regular folks, white, black, brown, yellow, and they just told you. And so you try to find a way to humanize these issues and to get the students involved with them. And then all high school students really want to do is give you their opinion. So if that project gives them an outlet for that, and mine recorded a podcast based on the particular conspiracy they chose, you give them an outlet. It sounds stupid, because, PBL asks you to publish these things, to make them public, to give them some accountability, and they need to be informed. So, if you're going to put yourselves out there with this opinion, you can't sound stupid. So what is it that you need to know and to understand in order to put out an intellectual product of your own thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah. And giving them the ownership of, hey, you're publishing this podcast and this is your opinion and people are going to listen to it. Just in the design of the product itself is kind of allowing you to step back. What do you do in your classroom, specifically, while the project is going, to kind of push back a little bit and to let them run with it? Are there any specific moves you make or that you've kind of noticed that you've done over the past few years, that have contributed to a more student-centered environment?
I think last spring I did my seniors had to do a documentary for their final project, and I was fortunate to have a pretty mature group, and deadlines were important, but they were between myself and the secretary for the group. We had a digital checkout list for equipment. So everything was kind of digital, where they could kind of see where they were as far as all their deadlines. They knew what was being checked out when. They had to have a place where they told me who they were interviewing, when. And that's the part of PBL I try to, when I'm telling my teachers, I've probably taught how to write interview questions every year, but I don't really know if they cared. But last year when my kids had to interview police officers or doctors or lawyers or anything else, then they really cared, how to write an interview question.
Right.
And it's just providing them that realistic context. And before, at a traditional school, you do your project at the end and they show you what they learned. And it's hard for people to understand how PBL is different. It's giving them all those skills as they go. And it's a very big paradigm shift. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. what would you say has been your most challenging PBL moment? You talked about your breakthrough moment, your breakthrough student, but what has been your most challenging moment?
I think probably going from New Tech to a traditional high school where I didn't necessarily know the backgrounds of the kids as much and the capabilities. We were really spoiled in a one-to-one setting with kids who, I know you're a young pup, but those kids taught me, they programmed my phones. They did, they did everything for me technology-wise. And, I came into a school with, where kids are still hitting enter, to go from one line to the next while they're typing. And, so I really had to figure out where their skill set was, what I could do to help them, what their expectations were, where we don't have as many of our students go to four-year colleges, but, so what is my expectation? What do I want from them? We have a lot who go to two-year colleges here and transfer. So what skills do they need to know and what resources do I have? So I think it took a little time for me to see exactly, and I think going into any new school would be difficult to figure out, where the kids are, we have kids in our county who don't have internet access, just period, people who don't have internet access because of where they live. We have teachers who can't access the internet at home.
Right.
So, there are a lot of things to understand before you just kind of jump in, because one of the things that's really important early on in PBL is their buy-in, but it's also that they can find success. And so you really don't want to set them up to fail with your first project.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, because buy-in, students will buy in, but if they start to feel like, hey, this is kind of impossible, right? Like there are no possibilities of this coming out, well, or I have no way to access internet at all. How can we still make a meaningful project for them?
Right.
And that definitely can present a major challenge.
And it's hard for a teacher because you spend all that time designing the perfect project, and then halfway through you're like, well, okay, let's just scrap this. And that's, that's a big step too.
Yeah. And that's happened to me before.
We've all been there.
It does. What tips do you have for PBL practitioners specifically related to the ELA courses? And I know that you teach AP Lit. Do you also teach AP Lang?
No, our school doesn't have it. I teach the AP Lang curriculum in our 11th grade class somewhat. It's kind of my pre-AP class. So the AP Lang is primarily nonfiction, rhetoric, persuasion, and stuff like that, which I really love. So I do it a lot in 11th grade.
Okay.
I think that's...
what tips do you have for English teachers working with PBL?
I think that PBL is an excellent way to get the kids the practice on the nonfiction side of things. None of us become English teachers because we want to teach speeches and journals. We want to teach poetry and novels and things like that. But nonfiction is a huge part of our curriculum now, and Common Core and different things. And it allows kids to do research, to get their opinions out there. If it's designing a website, if it's a podcast, if it's a documentary, if it's a presentation to a group of people. The torture project that I did, the kids presented to, a former military police officer. And we heard from, at New Tech, we had a Duke law professor come in who had actually worked with the Bush administration on some of those policies that I was totally unaware of. But things, they can get the kids really going on nonfiction, and you might become, as a teacher, a little more enthusiastic about it as well. It's a really cool way to get the kids a little more engaged, and sometimes we're the ones that are more engaged in the fiction and the poetry, but they can really get hooked with the nonfiction and the things that they can do with that and put out there. And, I really think that's a way for them to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question here, just really, I'm asking if you have any specific organizational tools that have really helped you as a PBL practitioner.
I use the curriculum maps. I don't know. I hated turning them in, but I definitely like seeing everything in front of me at one time. There are a lot of things in the PBL handbook to walk you through a project, but I like seeing everything there at one time. One of the things that I know I'm not very good at, that I think Catherine Livingston, whom we taught with, is wonderful at, is workshopping. And there are some organizers, because it's so hard to know when a workshop is going to pop up. Sometimes the kids, they needed a workshop in film editing, and don't well, but there are some tools.
I'm sorry, you said don't be afraid to outsource those workshops.
Right. I've had a lot of.
And what do you mean by that?
We have an instructional facilitator at my school who helps me a lot with the technology, the video editing. We've have our media center coordinator has done a great job working with my students, and we do some breakout EDU lessons for bonding, where the kids, it's kind of like an escape room scenario. And they have to, like my students, after they were at Gatsby, they had to answer some questions on Gatsby to get an invitation to his party and things like that. So, it's not all about you, and really 21st century and collaboration and all that. There are people who know what you need a whole lot better than you, especially if you're making it a kind of a multidisciplinary project. And so, go out there and get that help and set up those workshops with other people. And I think the kids enjoy it. And I know the people that I work with feel much more involved with the kids that way. And it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Melissa, it has been such a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for sharing all of this knowledge with our listeners. How can folks get in contact with you if they want to keep the conversation going? Are you on Twitter?
I am on Twitter at Melissa.
All right.
And they can find me there.
Awesome. So can you spell it out? Just so.
My last name is
it's fine. That was cool.
Melissa, Melissa, but my last name is Teets. T as in Tom, E, T as in Tom, S as in Sam. And it's been a pleasure reconnecting with you, and I really wish you the best of luck with your projects.
Thank you so much. Right. Same to you. That's it for PBL in Practice, and tune in next week, everybody, for more tips and resources for your projects. Have a wonderful week.
The audio you just heard was recorded in Anchor. Learn more at anchor.fm.